So the property market is going to crash. It's not just going to crash and bring values down, it could actually bring society down. And I studied this subject so deeply, and what I have discovered has blown my mind. The thing that people believe to be true is that property will always go up in value, and property is a good investment. So let's say you own a home today and you've been lucky enough to buy a home when the values haven't gone out of control, and you've made, in theory, on paper, a lot of money. Now, if you are this person, you think you have made lots of money in your property, and you haven't. If you bought a house in England with gold in 1970, house prices versus gold would be worth more now than that house. So let's first of all just knock out the park that houses are the best investment. There's plenty of ways to make money that have nothing to do with the housing market. If you own a house that's gone up in value, what you've entered into is a system where everybody has believed buying a house pushes up the value of the house that you own. But the truth is, you haven't really made more money. If, for example, you sell that house and you take out the equity that you've made, you have rent to pay, you have high inflation. Inflation is defined by the amount of money available for a particular commodity. If there's only one cucumber and everybody wanted a cucumber, the value of that cucumber will be astronomical. So that's what's happened to the property market. A property that has not really changed in its true value has become valuable because of two things. One, you as an individual bought that house, you've contributed to this problem. And you're not better off because when you sell that house, you are subject to what inflation has occurred in the system, and now your rent would be higher. Your cost of living is much, much higher. In this case, in the UK, the value of the pound has depreciated. So what you get for your pounds is also less. So your cost of living is much higher. And in reality, the real people you've hurt by buying this house are your kids. Your kids now have to work as slaves almost in a business they don't necessarily love to pay the mortgage to buy a house that's now so much more expensive because you made a bit of money in property. So maybe the argument is, well, Simon, I bought a house, I'm going to leave it to my kids, right? So you bought this house, you're not going to sell it and take the equity out, cause yourself inflationary cost, life increases, and your children pain because you're going to leave the house to your kids, right? That argument has one major flaw. In most countries, in England again as a model, when you come to sell your house, you have inheritance tax, which depending on when you sell it, right now it's around 45%. Your kids have to sell that house to pay the inheritance tax. So if, for example, you have a sibling and that your parents die and that house has to be sold to pay the inheritance tax, then you pay tax on the money that you're receiving, and that's split between two of you. You've got a fraction of the money to buy a house. So even if you're lucky enough to have a parent that owned a house, they bought that house along with everybody else, the prices went up, you're still stuck not being able to afford a house and needing to get a 25-year mortgage and work as a slave in the system to pay that debt, to do the same fucking thing again. The same rat race again. Let's talk about the people that do buy to let. So I actually think this business is bordering on evil. Yes, there's people that are making money in the buy to let model, but what they're actually doing is it's not really a business, in my opinion. It's not a real business. What they're actually doing is, and this all links back to the banks. The banks have caused this problem. Why? In 2008, when the financial crisis hit, this is just a recent example, the banks were given a lot of money. The Central Bank of England printed money. They created money. It wasn't backed by gold. It didn't have any real tangible anchor. They just said, let's print more money. And they gave that money to the banks and they said, lend it. Lend it so that the system greases back up again and we don't collapse as an economy. But the banks, three guys in a room, decided that they wouldn't lend that money to the real world economy. They'd lend it based on property. Because if they lend it to someone who owns a property, they've got an asset that they can claim. It's low risk lend for the bank, right? But what they should have done, and what is the real world economy, is lend it to people to start a business. Because if you lend it to people to start a business, then that goes into the real economy. Now, to explain this quickly best is trickle down economics, which is a big policy around the Conservative government, is You give money to the rich, you give them tax breaks and tax incentives, they then create jobs, but it doesn't actually happen. If I give £20,000 to a rich person, like you give £20,000 to me, I just stick it in my bank account. I don't do anything with it. You give £20,000 to a nurse, she's going to spend that money on a washing machine, she's going to spend that money on a car, she's going to spend that money to pay her bills and eat, him or her. They're going to pay it in the real world economy. So the housing market, the big problem with it is it doesn't actually contribute to GDP. When you give money to the real world economy, like a nurse, you give her extra money that goes into the real economy, that actually creates jobs, that actually creates real world purchasing of goods. But if someone buys a property and it goes up double, in reality, 99% of people just sit on that asset. There's no money going into the economy, and what it does is it creates inflation, because now the costs of living are higher. So a buy-to-let system is literally the bank saying to anybody, if you've got an asset, we'll lend you the money to buy it. So then there's more people chasing that asset, more money chasing that asset than there are actual physical assets. So again, the price goes up. And when someone buys a property on a buy-to-let system, their whole job is to buy that property and get maximum yield. And they're lending the money based on the property, so the property values go up again. And who are they renting that house to? A nurse, a policeman. So a nurse rents that house, maximum yield for the buy-to-let owner. Now half their salary is going on rent. So of course they want to get a mortgage, but that creates more mortgage demand, which creates increasing value in houses. And that nurse then has, for the first time in history in England, nurses have had to go on strike. 150 years, nurses always go to work. Why? Because if they don't, people die. But now they could die because they can't pay the heating bill. They can't pay for food because the cost of living has gone up, and a large proportion of their salary is going on paying the rent, because we made property a business instead of a basic human right. So who wins? Monopoly was created to highlight that if you sell property in a capitalistic system, in the end there's only one winner. And I honestly think that right now, if a nurse has to go on strike to get more money that the NHS doesn't have, for those that don't know, in England we have the NHS, which is a free healthcare service that cannot pay more money to the nurse, then what happens? The system collapses. The nurse loses her job. Or you pay her more, which is what's happening. You print more money, so inflation money. You also then create general inflation because that person's now getting paid more. For what? Because of the property market. And what's the end conclusion here? 250,000 homeless is one conclusion. People getting kicked out of their homes via not being able to afford their rent, or cost of living going up and not being able to pay their bills and getting into debt and getting evicted from your home. People not being able to make their mortgage payments. That's when interest rates are low. 250,000 homeless people in the UK before inflation kicked in around interest rates. And all because we let three bankers decide what happens to the money that they're given. And instead of putting it into the real world economy and creating GDP increase, we put it into a fixed asset, and everybody thinks they're getting rich if they own a property, and they're not. And everybody who wants to get into the buy-to-let business is, in my opinion, getting into the fuck up the world business. And I personally think there's a few ways we can fix it. First of all, build properties. I do think it's fine to lend money to people that are creating new properties, because that creates jobs. Building material purchasing creates jobs, labour, work, income. It's real world economy, and it eases the supply problem that we clearly have in nearly every part of the world. So it's good. The second thing I think we need to do is stop banks lending money based on property and start making banks lend the money they sit on to help people start businesses of their own, to help people create jobs, to help people put money back into the real economy and do what they love. Instead of working in a shit job they hate to pay for the mortgage that's trapped them into thinking they're going to be rich later, instead give people freedom to enjoy what they do every day and make money doing that. And I think give entrepreneurs the chance to save the planet, save us actually, not the planet. The planet will be fine when we're gone. You know, I do think entrepreneurs will save the world. Innovation will save the world. But we need to empower people to do that. And I think banks should start lending money, micro lending, £1,000, £2,000, £5,000 to help people start their dream business. Put money into the real economy. I also believe, and this, I'm not a socialist, I'm a capitalist, that we should start enforcing rules like you can only own one home. No, it's a basic human right. You can only own one home. Buy-to-let should be banned. And I see a whole light at the end of the tunnel if we start empowering people to do what they love. Let me know what you think of all this. I'd love to build a movement around this. I don't like to hate anything, but property is becoming an evil product, and it's not helping society. And even if you own a house right now and you think I'm wrong, you know what I'm saying is right. You're not going to end up richer. Your kids will end up poorer and slaves to the system, thinking just like you did that owning a home was going to make them happy, and it won't.